The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is a 1920s German silent film that tells the story of a hypnotist who, despite looking like a mashup of Ebenezer Scrooge and Danny DeVito's Penguin, is a totally harmless character. I assure you, trust me. Who has the intention of bringing his exhibit and sharing it with the patrons of a local fair. Now, his exhibit happens to be a 20-something-year-old man who has spent the majority of his life in a sort of waking sleep state. Essentially, he's a sleepwalker who has the ability to read your fortune and predict your future and things like that. Well, as it just so happens, around the same exact time that these fellas roll into town, um, it also sparks a string of mysterious murders that propel the plot into sort of a whodunit murder mystery crime sort of thing, where our main protagonist, Francis, desperately tries to prove that it is in fact the doctor who is behind them. And I would say that the highest point in terms of the plot would have to be um, the not one but two uh, twists that happen near the end of the film. So, spoiler alert to anybody who hasn't seen this yet. But the first is just the revelation that the doctor here is not actually the doctor, but rather the director of an asylum who is impersonating him. Essentially, he's a copycat killer who is working to get inside his mind and really understand what makes him tick. And the second is that our boy Francis, who is narrating the story, this old guy who he's recalling the story to, and this woman who Francis proclaims to be his wife or fiance or something along those lines, all happen to be patients of that same asylum, which would heavily imply that the whole movie doesn't take place, but rather is I don't know if you would want to call it a paranoid delusion, some sort of manic psychotic episode that seems to try to villainize the director of the asylum. Um, in terms of the rest of it, the meat and potatoes of the plot, um, I feel like this is the grandfather template, if you will, for more modern examples of the genre, which doesn't mean it's bad or anything like that, especially by 1920 standards. There's just something to me about it that feels familiar and that I've seen it a time or two before, if that makes sense. But I would say my favorite things about the film overall um, are, for one, the musical score. Now, I know in the few examples of silent films that I've talked about before that I have experience with, I've said that it doesn't seem entirely uncommon for the music to feel mismatched or disconnected from the overall tone and vibe that it's working to convey on screen. That is not the case here. Pretty much from the start, it sets a very um, sinister, eerie tone that gets carried throughout the film's runtime. That coupled with a lot of imagery in the film, particularly in its set pieces and how they use distortion and contortion, and they have a lot of things that come to very jagged, aggressive points. All of these different elements worked in tandem to create a very consistently unsettling experience for me, the viewer. That this wasn't a movie that I found easy to get comfortable with or settle into in any real way. It found a way to, no matter how subtly, keep me on edge, and I applaud it for that. All in all, I would say that this movie is perfectly fine. I feel like it definitely adds a certain amount of historical value to my shelf. I'm glad to own it. And I would just say that, it might be worth a watch to you if you haven't seen it yet, or maybe you didn't even know that this movie was a thing. It might be worth checking out for you at that point. But I think that's going to wrap this video up, guys. So as always, thanks for watching. Take care of yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one.